Hi, this is Grandma here, and I'm beginning a new book called It's a Jungle Out There by Ron Snell. Now, this book is nonfiction, and that means it's a true story. And this is Ron's memories, so it's a memoir of living in a jungle with his parents when he was a child. The first thing we're going to do is preview the book a little. We can see that there's a macaw here and palm trees. Looks pretty much like a jungle. And when we open it up, we see the table of contents. And if you read through some of these chapter headings, that'll kind of give you an idea of the direction the book is going to go in. Midnight Matzo and Menagerie. Spam Stampede. Do you know what spam is? It's like a fake ham. Riding the Flood. Tingo Maria to Lima. Okay. And that kind of gives me an idea of where it takes place. It takes place in Peru. Now, this map, it took me a long time to figure it out. This is all of Peru, this dark gray. This little white rectangle there is the rest of this map. So where this is taking place is right here, and they have enlarged that section of the map for you to see. Now, I'm going to tell you right now that there are a lot of words here that I am not familiar with. They are words that are native to the indigenous people in Peru. I have tried my best to look them up to learn how to pronounce them. And we'll just see how it goes. Continuing our preview, we read a section here. I'm going to read this section here. Tell us about your life in the jungle, they asked me again and again. Oh, I don't think I can, I answered. It was such a different world. How can I possibly explain it? Well, then, said a soft-spoken little friend in the front row, just tell me some stories. And so I did. Some were funny, some were sad, some were, well, you'll see. So this is a little bit like the introduction. It tells you why he's writing the book, because people wanted to know about his stories. And we turn to chapter 1, and it has a photo of the family, the mother, the father, and there are 4 children, 2 girls and 2 boys, it looks like. And it looks like they have a cat or some kind of pet. But they are sitting on what is probably the front porch of their house. Now, what kind of people who look like that live in a jungle? Any idea? Well, when we turn to the back of the book, there's something called a special note, and I'm going to read you some of this. Although these stories may seem unusual to you, they really aren't that different from the experiences of my colleagues, my friends, my heroes. Members of the Summer Institute of Linguistics and Wycliffe Bible Translators continue to work with minority language groups in every conceivable setting around the world, from towering mountain villages to scorching desert tents to developing cities. The pages of their lives would fill a library and are smeared with sweat, drenched in tears, underlined with laughter, and overflowing with love. Their stories could be yours. There are opportunities for service around the globe using an unbelievable variety of skills and backgrounds. If you would like more information on a most unusual way to give your life, contact the Wycliffe Bible Translators. So that kind of tells us what they were doing there. They were living there to learn the language so they could translate the Bible into the language of the people. And then finally, we read the back cover a little bit. I wouldn't trade my childhood for any other. Conceived in the Amazon rainforest, I learned to walk and talk among the Mashaginga Indians, who to this day call me Ronnie. The Machis were my first babysitters and friends. From them, I learned to tie a house together, eat monkeys and macaws, and make dugout canoes. They laughed at my log rides down rampaging rivers and caught exotic pets for me. Life was one great adventure after another. After all, what could be more fun than perching in thorn trees at night to escape a herd of stampeding pigs? Well, this gives us a really good idea as to what kind of stories they are. And then it tells a little bit about Ron Snell today. He has lived and worked extensively in Peru, Mexico, and Indonesia. He currently lives with his family in Texas, where he dabbles in boat building, real estate, conducting tours to Peru, speaking, and writing. One of his greatest joys is helping people in all walks of life learn to admire and love people of other cultures. All right, so now we have previewed this book. We've read little bits and pieces of it. And now let's begin with Chapter 1, The Mighty Push. My brother Terry and I were sitting on our front porch carving balsa wood and our fingers into bloody canoes and airplanes when Dad hollered at us. Dad's normal volume was holler or higher. Ronnie, Terry! He used the Mashaginga version of Ronnie and Terry. How about if you two help Arturo get back home? As usual, it sounded more like a Navy gunner's order than a question, but we jumped at the chance for an adventure. Sure, we stereoed, wiping the blood off our jackknives. How'd he get down here? Arturo's house was 2 hours and 2 rapids upriver from Camisea, a small village of about 20 huts deep in the jungle of southern Peru. We lived there off and on as our parents helped the Mashagingas with community development projects and worked to translate the New Testament into their language. I brought Appa's canoe down, Arturo answered in Mashaginga, smiling because he'd figured out our English question. Of course, since Appa meant father, and since a Mashaginga calls just about every man a generation up Appa, we hadn't the slightest idea who he was talking about. I have to take it back to him, but there'll be some other canoe you can borrow to come back in. We knew he didn't have any idea if there would or wouldn't be a canoe we could borrow or how we'd get home again. But at the time, it didn't seem to matter, even though I was just 9 and Terry 10. Besides, we liked Arturo, our big brother, according to Mashagingas who had adopted us into their big family. He was a young bilingual school teacher with a squinty-eyed smile and an enviable gold canine tooth, a couple of railroad track tattoos running across his cheeks, and an unconscious habit of going through his beaky nose. You need to get going right away so you can be back by dark, Dad told us. Every once in a while, he sounded as if he cared whether or not we survived these trips. Grab some lunch and some extra water. We joined Arturo at the table. Lunch was fast, but not fast enough to escape Mom's collection of practical suggestions. She obviously cared a lot whether we survived this adventure. In between swallows of boiled water and smoked monkey meat, we nodded and shook our crew-cut blonde heads to indicate that yes, we would be careful. No, we would not let ourselves get sunburned. Yes, we would find a canoe to come home in. No, we would not drink the river water unless we were drowning in it. Lunch gulped and instructions endured. Terry grabbed a paddle, and the 3 of us hurried barefoot down our short path to the river. Appa's canoe was pulled up in the mucky bank, tied with a vine to make sure it wouldn't escape while no one was looking. Canoes are precious, since it takes about 6 months to make one. Arturo got in the front, Terry in the middle, and I in the back. That made Terry and Arturo the standing polers and me the sitting paddler. We were all stripped down to gym shorts. Now you have to understand that poling a dugout against a strong current is hard work. They're going upstream. One reason is that you have to stand up to do it. Appa's canoe was 26 feet long, round, and only 20 inches wide. It was hacked out of a tree and still looked a lot like one. About the only thing that made this canoe stable was practice, which Terry and I'd been getting since we were born. Another thing that makes poling hard is you have to push on the pole with just the right parts of your body. It's difficult to describe which ones those are because we kind of grew up doing it. Suffice it to say that when inexperienced visitors tried it, they didn't pole with the right parts of their bodies. Every time their pole slipped or stuck in the mud, they put on gymnastics performance. Head first, feet kicking, spraddle-legged, flap-armed, open mouth, they'd fly into the river. Mashagingas loved to watch outsiders trying to pole, as long as they weren't in the canoe with them. Arturo and Terry and I had it pretty easy for the first 20 minutes. The current was sluggish, the water was clear. 3 feet down, we could just make out the stingrays camouflaged in their mud beds and suckerfish leaving pale white circles where they'd sucked the moss off the rocks. I loved watching Mashagingas pole their canoes. The near liquid grace of muscles flowing and bulging, the rhythmic rise and fall of the bow, the hearty and hilarious grunts when the going gets tough. The tougher it gets, the more the machis laugh. "We need to get over on the left side, Ronnie," Arturo reminded me as we approached our first rapid. There we could edge against the side of a rock cliff, take advantage of whirlpools and backwaters as we inched our way upstream. The current was roaring now. I could see the muscles in Arturo's bare back and the shoulders flow and bulge under the increasing strain. Terry and he were taking turns, one planting his pole before the other moved his. That kept us from slipping back downriver. It was my job to keep the boat pointed exactly into the current and close to the bank. We inched our way slowly, steadily, carefully through the eddies, backwaters, and burbles, ever closer to the big waves, until we could go no further, and it was all Arturo and Terry could do just to keep us where we were. "Ooh, it's getting too swift on this side, Ronnie. Let's cross," Arturo commanded, and in a flash, he pushed the nose out into the current. Mashaginga for and I answered and exploded into action. With my arms breaking, my heart pounding, I thrashed my paddle like a wild banshee, and it was all up to me because I was the only one with a paddle. Mashaginga paddles sometimes need a lot of thrashing because they aren't much more than a stick with one flat side and a handle on it. The handle is so you can tell which end to put in the water. Lots of times, the biggest difference between a pole and a paddle is how long it is. Poles have to reach to the bottom of the river. Paddles only have to reach the water line, which is often about even with the sides of the canoe. That's when bailing gourds come in handy. I knew that crossing the swift river, we'd have to be quick. Otherwise, the canoe would race backwards down the river faster than it was creeping across the river. We'd end up so far back downriver that there wouldn't be any good poling, and we'd have to come right back across. If that happens, it would be quiet for a long time. Unless, of course, someone fell in or got hurt in the process, then the others would laugh their heads off. Well, we only lost 30 feet before Terry and Arturo found the bottom with their poles. Not bad. We edged up to the rapid from the other side, leaped out of the canoe at just the right moment, and began dragging it through the boulders and waves. Since we were barefooted, our feet crunched down between rocks, our toes got twisted, our toenails broken. The water grabbed at our legs, always trying to wash them out from under us. We took turns slipping and falling and frantically grabbing the canoe for support until we would get up and pull some more. I reckon that was about as much fun as two boys could ever have in their life. Our legs got banged, our feet got cut, and we pushed and strained and pulled for 15 minutes until finally, slowly, we hauled our heavy canoe into the smooth water at the top of the rapid. Panting, we tumbled in, grabbed poles and paddle, breathed easy for a couple of minutes, even as we worked to keep the canoe from going backwards right over the rapid. Arturo kind of laughed as we were the best entertainment he'd had in a long time and went a couple of times, and we were off again. We'd make it halfway in a little over an hour. Not bad. The second rapid wasn't as difficult as the first, and then a long, straight stretch of relative calm brought a row of thatched huts into view. Worn paths tied the houses to the sandbar between them and the river. Butterflies and other flies swarmed around piles of dog poop in the sand. Picturesque. A few naked children splashed in the water, but as far as we could see, there were no canoes beached in the sand. We should have known the men would be out hunting and the women would be at their gardens. I'm going, Arturo told Terry and then me. Culturally, he had to say it to each of us. You're going, we both responded automatically. In Mashaginga, farewells are a short statement of the obvious. We were on our own. The village, as far as we could tell, was virtually deserted. We had lived there a couple of years before and knew almost everybody who wasn't home. The few old women we found in smoke-filled cookhouses didn't know anything about canoes. Oh, let's just swim back, Terry suggested after all the possibilities had faded. To us, it seemed a brilliant solution, though one that no Mashaginga would have considered in 1,000 years. Well, why do you think that is? Mashaginga adults don't swim just for the fun of it. To them, a river is a faucet, a laundromat, a fish market, a highway, a bathtub, and a toilet. Not necessarily in that order, unfortunately. Only to us white outsiders was it a fabulous swimming hole. We headed out across the blinding white sandbar through the rainbow cloud of butterflies. At one spot, just before we reached the shoreline, 40 or 50 of them swarmed together in a brilliant splotch of yellow-orange. I found them irresistible. Raised our paddle high in the air, smacked it down on the butterflies with a mighty whoop, missed the butterflies, hit the poop, broke the paddle. Now we only had nothing to paddle, but nothing to paddle with either. For some reason, that seemed worse, and Terry let me know it. Why'd you do that? You don't ever over-whop things with your paddle, especially things that are swarming on a pile of dog poop. Now, what are we going to do? Well, there wasn't much we could do. So we pitched the paddle parts, waded into the river, and swam to the other side. Swam, in fact, right into the perfect solution to our problem, a log left over from the last high water. It wasn't much of a log as an Amazonian logs go, but we were in no position to be choosy, and this one at least looked as if it might barely keep two little boys afloat if we could launch it and stay on it. Push! I am pushing! Push harder! Pick up on it while you're pushing. I am pushing harder, and if I try to lift it, I just sink into the mud. We heaved and hoed and grunted and strained like a couple of skinny mud wrestlers until finally the log oozed itself off the bank into the current. Then we scrambled aboard, bareback, and locked our legs around it like parenthetical clamps. Across the river, Mashaginga kids silently stared like now they'd seen it all. Right then, a canoe materialized out of nowhere with a frowning paddler at the stern. The Mashagingas had always taken such good care of us that since we were babies, our parents had let us go anywhere with them. Now, one of our very concerned fathers offered to take us home, even though it might mean an overnight in Cambasea for him. "No thanks," we said. "We're okay, and we have a log to get home on." He was not impressed, well aware that a log wasn't the same as a canoe, even if both came from trees. Eventually, we convinced him that we'd be fine, and we drifted slowly away as he sat in his canoe, typically not showing any hint of how stupid he thought we were. Now remember, we didn't have any way to steer our log. You don't really steer logs anyway. Steering a log in a river is kind of like steering a buffalo in a stampede. When you're riding a log, the log chooses the route, which is exhilarating until it decides to grind your legs off against a cliff or roll over in a rapid. All of that seemed unlikely as we started off. For a 9-year-old, there isn't much to match riding your very own log down a cool, clear river in the middle of a jungle with your big brother. Towering trees dripped green vines into the water. The occasional pair of macaws rocked their way across our narrow window of blue sky. As we approached the first rapid, our speed picked up an exhilarating pace. A frightening pace, to be exact. Being totally out of control added to the thrill, and we both screamed our fears behind screams of enthusiasm as we lifted our legs, dug in our fingernails, and balanced for dear life. "If this thing turns sideways, jump off," Terry yelled. Running sideways, the log could catch on a rock, buck us off downriver, and then pancake us on its way back. Boulders raced past us, waves splashed and submerged us. We shot right through a forked tree branch that stuck up at the waterline, and we dodged the branches so they wouldn't scrape us off. Beneath us, we could hear the crunchy sounds of rock grinding each other into sand, and briefly considered what that might feel like. Our log flew straight as an arrow past the rock bar, did a couple of spins in the whirlpools and eddies, bumped into a cliff or two, and finally slowed to a casual drift. "Wow!" I shouted. "That was great!" "We're just lucky we didn't get killed," Terry answered. "I don't know how we're going to get through that next one." If you remember, the next one was the dangerous one. In the lazy, slow section between rapids, we could relax. We took turns throwing rocks at the kingfishers, jumping into the river, diving to the bottom, sprawling turtle-like on the log to warm ourselves. Then, as the afternoon wore dangerously on, the roar of the second, worse rapid filled our nervous ears. If our log just chose its own route, it would snuggle up to the right bank and follow the current through a hard right turn. That turn would end up in a high-speed battering ram approach to a log jam before we swung into a hard left turn that would run us through some ominously high waves. None of that sounded fun. So, with adrenalized energy, we hand-paddled the log to a vine-covered mud bank for a reconnoiter just above the rapid. Terry's confident opinion was that he should point the front of the log out into the water, and I should give us such a mighty push that our momentum would carry us 20 feet to the left side of the channel before the current could crush us against the right side. There was clearly one pivotal point on which the plan would succeed or fail: the mighty push. Terry repeated that 3 or 4 times, louder each time, as if sheer volume would overcome the roar of the river and the inherent difficulties in pulling off such a maneuver. Ready or not, the front of the log swung briefly in the right direction. I grunted, strained, heaved, and shoved us as mighty a push as I'd ever pushed. The log didn't notice. Mostly my legs were deep in the mud, so that as the current caught the log and raced off with it, I had the horrible feeling that I was going to get left behind. Frantic, I worked my legs loose from the mud, swam like fury, and caught up just in time. Terry was yelling about my specific and general failures. The rapids were roaring with laughter, and I was trying to get back on board in the few seconds of life I had left. In those brief seconds, we made the dreaded sharp right turn, shot down the shallow introductory section, and crashed into the accumulated debris along the bank. We had one more chance at life. "Push!" Terry yelled, and I pushed as I've never pushed before or since. "We've got to get to the left of those waves," as if I didn't already know. This time my push did a little good. Our momentum carried us 10 feet across the channel before we spun around, submarined backwards just along the side of the biggest waves, and ejected ourselves from the log before it killed us. We hit the backwaters and whirlpools, swimming for our lives and having a pretty one-sided conversation about the mighty push. Fortunately, I couldn't hear most of what Terry was saying. We never got back on the log. The rest of the way home, we swam. Walked along muddy banks, watched the birds fly home to bed, and jabbed at stingrays with sharp sticks just to relieve the boredom. It was nearly dark by the time we limped back up the path toward the light of the Coleman lantern at our house. "Have a good trip?" Dad asked. "Yeah, great," we said. "How'd you get home?" asked Mom more specifically. "Oh, we're starving," we answered. I wonder if she ever found out. Okay, that's the end of chapter 1. What did you think? Did you think that's the way it would be? We had some hints when we previewed the book that it was going to be a lot of adventures and experiences that most of us never have had. Okay, see you next time. Bye-bye.